Rolling.
Alright, so why don't we check your batteries since you don't know the condition. I see you got 3 of one type and 1 of another. I really don't like that because that means these batteries are mismatched. Anytime you have mismatched batteries, they charge differently and they kind of fight each other every time they charge and discharge, every time you sit overnight and then you have to recharge. And either the one gets weak or the other 3 get weak. You know, you end up with like a hodgepodge. So I would say run the truck until the batteries start to get a little weak and then change all 4 of them as a set. And make sure you stay as a set from now on. You know, they will last longer and they'll run better if you keep them as an equal set with equal type and size batteries. What I like to do, because the truck sat last night when you got here and you haven't cranked it, the batteries are going to be a little low. So I got my thermal camera out, and what we can do is we can watch the batteries as they start to charge after you crank your truck, and we can see if there's any weak posts or anything like that, or hot spots, or if the batteries are charging evenly and stuff like that. So we can see if there's anything wrong with the batteries. So I'm going to plug my little thermal camera in. And this thing, the other day, had a driver that was here, and we found all kinds of problems with his battery. He was like, nah, that's not going to catch anything. And we found a bunch of problems we had to fix. I kind of have to stand back here.
Rolling.
Alright, can you see the camera?
Mm-hmm.
Alright, let me focus, because it's a manual focus on this one. And you can see there's a little heat coming from him. This one here is a little warmer than the rest. This one's kind of the coldest one, which is this one is a different battery. So that's battery 1, 2, 3, and 4. So go ahead and crank the truck, and let's watch to see what happens. You also have a alternator looks pretty good. Still a little cold compared to the rest, but other than that, it's not too bad.
Rolling.
Now that we looked at your batteries, let's take a look with the computer. How about that? Looking at your after treatment history here, it's not great. It's in the high 2s, low 3s, which means, you know, it's not doing too bad, but it's not doing too great. Anything above 3.0 as an average is going to cause you some fuel mileage. Anything above 4 or 5 is going to cause you problems and shutdowns. So it's not great. You know, you got 3.7, 3.3, 2.4, 2.6s. The last one's a 1.8, which is really good. That means it did a good healthy regen there in the last one. So just keep a close eye on that stuff. Let's take a look here at some of this other stuff. Duty cycle monitor tells you a lot about the truck. Depending on how many hours are on this thing. It says here you've got between this 19%, you know, 21%, 23, 25%. Plus another 14 is 39. It's got about 38 or 39% idle on here and running, not going down the road. It's pretty high over the life of the truck. You know, this obviously hasn't been reset in a very long time. So, and of course your average torque load, you know, if you look across it this way, the high RPM range is not used that much at all, very little, which is not good because you should be downshifting early with this engine and using the horsepower, not the torque, when you're pulling mountains. So somebody's really driven this thing below 1400 RPMs most of his life, and that's not really good for this motor. You know, these 2350s, yeah, they got a lot of torque down there, and they'll do it, but anything below about 1500 or so, you've got higher, you know, internal engine friction, higher chance of fretting liners, and this kind of problems long term. So, you know, that could always be an issue with them. So most of his life has been driven pretty low in RPMs, which is not the greatest thing for it. Of course, that's my opinion, but you know, I base it on what I see. You know, these guys overseas in Australia, they're running road trains and heavy torque load engines, and you know, these kind of different applications. And most of the time, the guys who run them in really heavy applications say that they last the longest at around 1600 RPM when they're pulling really hard, versus gearing them tall and running them lower RPMs to try to get their fuel mileage, which just generally beats up on them a bit. So it's not the best thing in the world. So I would definitely change your driving style or whatever to make sure you get higher RPMs when you're going up hills and stuff, downshift air rate, things like that. And also you've got your biggest percentage is between 10 and 30%. You've got a little bit above the 30%. So it's showing about 28% or so roughly of average engine load over the lifespan of the engine so far. And that's typical of most highway trucks in America. So, you know, 28% is right in the ballpark. So that means it hasn't been run really hard. It wasn't used in some construction application where somebody was stomping the guts out of the fuel pedal, you know, most of his life so far. So those are good signs. You know, it's basically looks like a typical highway application. You know, torque load map, minus somebody never really using higher RPMs where they should have. They were just lugging the engine going up every hill. And you can see it here in the high percentage down here in the 1200 and below, above 30% torque. So, you know, somebody was just really driving it hard in the lower RPM ranges when they would get on the hill. And that's not good for them. So just some advice, you can take it with a grain of salt, nobody has to agree with it. Engine abuse history, we'll take a look at that. You've got 33 hours of high oil temp above 235. That's a little bit of a red flag. And this probably goes right back to somebody lugging the crap out of the motor when they go up the mountains and stuff. So that falls right in line with that. Other than that, you really don't have anything here. You've got a little bit of high crankcase pressure alarms, but now you have the bypass, you know, the no element crankcase filter, so that should stop that. You should not get crankcase alarms anymore. So somebody probably neglected it at one point, didn't change the filter like they should have, things like that. So that's what I see, you know. Just taking a glance at it and guessing at what this history of this truck might be based on just some data here. You know, maybe I'm wrong, but you know, this is what I see. Engine protections, EGR gas pressure, it has faulted out a few times and gone into derate. Crankcase pressure, obviously somebody didn't change the crankcase filter or something happened there at one point. It looked like it was fairly early on in the engine's life too. It was at 5,000 hours operating time, and obviously you've got, you know, quite a bit more than that on it right now. So you've got, you know, more than 15,000 on it. So, and then earlier than that was a turbo intake temp alarm. And the turbo intake temp alarm could have been caused by, and it looked pretty high too. So either the sensor went bad, or it had a bad reading, bad wire, or something at some point, or maybe something unplugged it. Who knows? Or you know, or it could also have been at this high a temperature. It says 700 degrees. The only way you're going to get it in the 700 degree range is if somebody maybe was doing a part regen on the engine or doing a regen process, or they were climbing a mountain and they pulled off right away and shut the engine off. Now there's no more airflow, there's no more oil flow, there's nothing. So the heat bleeds through the back of the turbocharger from the exhaust and the manifold and everything into the face, and it causes that temp sensor to read really high. So it definitely got really hot once, legitimately, or it had some issue of, you know, reading some erroneous, really high value of 700 degrees. That's sort of an alarm a little bit to me. But obviously, you know, the turbo's working just fine. So, you know, it was also a long time ago too. Probably when the engine was fairly new, somebody did that or something happened. And the other thing that would cause high intake temp alarms would be clogged up air filter. The air cleaner wasn't replaced or somebody just let it starve of air really bad. But it wouldn't. I don't think it would get that high. Or possibly the exhaust was completely blocked up by something at some point in its history. You know, maybe that fluid injector failed and it caused a buildup of crystals in the decomp tube or something, and it just blocked the exhaust and caused something like this, would cause this too. So, you know, that's a possibility. But with it that high, I would probably think it would be more along the lines of somebody doing a forced regen or pulling a mountain, you know, and it really, the exhaust really being up around 800 or 900 degrees, and the manifold and the turbo and everything, and all of a sudden somebody shut the engine off, which is really bad for the turbocharger. You can carbonize the bearings, it can do a lot of problems. So,
server connection failed. Invalid argument.
hey, my mobile server just died. So that's what I see there. Let me kill my mobile server real quick.
Server connection failed. Host not found.
Exactly. Anyways, that's what I see there. You know, that's under engine protections and engine abuse. We can do a leak down test on the rail to see if your rail's leaking. That's one that's important. Rail leak test. And let's do that one. So, and I got a YouTube video on how to do this. It's called ISX Injector Leak Test, I think, video. But let me get the other screen up here where I can monitor the pressure. So there's really nothing wrong with this engine as far as leak down goes. You know, more than 4,000 psi or so in 1 minute, you'd have to start being concerned about it. This one's holding pressure extremely well, so that's a good sign. That looks good.
Good news.
Yeah. And let's see your fault codes. You got one old fault code here for rail pressure too high. And that could be, you know, cold fuel or sudden inrush of cold fuel or something, you know, in inclement weather. I've seen that happen once in a while on them. You know, it doesn't look like it's a legitimate fault that you need to really be concerned with, or, you know, unless it keeps coming up, unless you start getting the check engine light for it or something. But that's the only code you got in here. Engine's got 16,000 hours on it. We can look at the trip info if you want. The maximum DPF pressure was 4.5, which is a little high. Somebody's used the cruise quite a bit, which I'm not a fan of because it's not the most fuel efficient thing to do. It says the average fuel economy is 6.3, which isn't anything very good. For an aero truck, not so great, you know.
Yeah, it needs to come up.
Yeah, you need to work on getting it up. You said you drove slower and you've gotten some really good results out of that, and that's good. You started practicing driving a little slower and taking it easy. Average engine load is 27.5, which is right in the ballpark of what I figured, 28. So, and maybe we'll go play outside again. Cut.